The Nuts and Bolts of Writing, Season 2, a podcast where we talk about literature, the ins and outs of writing, and how to actually start writing.
Hello everyone, I am R.N. Roveleh, one of the co-hosts of The Nuts and Bolts of Writing and co-editor of the literary magazine The Unconventional Courier. Today, I will be interviewing writer Gershom Mabaquiao. He is a writer of fiction and nonfiction. His works touch on the darker recesses of the human psyche and Philippine folklore. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of the Philippines Los Baños. Gershom's short story, A Heaven So True for St. Peter, appeared in the Unconventional Courier in October 2022. His prose is deep and hard-hitting, an incursion into the dark side of human nature that isn't afraid to dive into heavy themes, analyze them, and make them come alive with a touch of magical realism. You can find Gershom Mabaquiao on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please follow him and discover his work. I'll put the links in the description below. Hello, Gershom, and it's wonderful to have you here.
Hi, Rebecca. I'm happy to be here, and I'm actually a bit nervous to be appearing in the podcast, but I hope everything would be just fun between the two of us.
I'm sure it will be. I'm really excited to have you here because I really loved the story that you published in our magazine. So I'm excited to talk to you and to learn more about you. So first of all, let me note something that is plain to see for readers of your fiction. You don't shy away from heavy topics.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yes. In A Heaven So True for St. Peter, we see the protagonist struggling with the traumas of his childhood, constantly conversing with his mother's ghosts. So it's not a story for the faint of heart, I must say, but it is so beautifully written that even in its darkest bits, it is so rewarding to read. So this leads to my first question. What are some themes that you like exploring in your prose?
Thank you very much for the compliment, actually. It really means so much coming from someone like you to tell me that my prose is good.
I loved it, and I'm sure so did our readers.
I hope so. Well, about the themes that I usually write in my prose, most of them talk about spirituality, especially religious trauma, a lot about sexuality, as someone who is a member of the LGBT community and who is non-binary, and then the fine line between pleasure and consent, and a lot about mental health, which is I'm a huge advocate for. So usually when I write something, may it be fiction or non-fiction, it revolves around those things.
I see, right. Yes, and this really reflects in your story without giving any spoilers, but we see a lot of that. Right. So censorship is something that writers who tackle such taboo topics always have at the back of their mind, and especially in today's world of trigger warnings, right? So I'm not only talking about being censored by the book industry or by a more sensitive readership, but also about the writing process, about censoring yourself, about choosing how far you want to go when describing such topics. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, this is going to be a very long discussion if you're up for
No
it.
problem. We are all ears.
Well, about censorship, one of the main reasons why I don't shy away from censoring my works, especially the topics, it's very sensitive topics that I talk about, is because of one professor that I had back in college who told me that real life doesn't have trigger warnings or disclaimers. She said that wars happen all over the world daily, and this is in response to a group of us in that very small class adding the T/W disclaimer on top of their their prose works. And then she just flipped out and told us that, no, don't do that. When we were younger and we were in college, we were presented with these stories that you wouldn't even be prepared about. And that's actually what happens in real life. You don't get a warning before something bad happens to you. And that is the reality for a lot of people, really. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for, against censorship in works, as long as it doesn't sensationalize some kind of violence or some kind of, I don't know, fetishizing things that are bothersome. I just believe that censorship in itself is something that is liberating, especially for people in the less fortunate parts of the world. Actually, censorship in itself, if we do a little bit of research, it actually started, I guess, from time immemorial. Censorship is what's responsible for the formation of taboo as a social concept, which we can see in different cultures all throughout the world. We can find censorship through cultural taboos, religious taboos, and food taboos. For example, we have uh, let me think of something. I guess swearing worldwide. It's something that we try to censor. Eye contact with the opposite sex in Arab cultures, and then the concept of death and sex. These are things that are kind of hard to talk about. But the question here is, why is it hard to talk about these things when these are very human experiences that happen to us every day? And because of this, we can notice a lot of use linguistically of euphemisms as a way to censor these topics and be able to talk about them in a, say, palatable way. And I believe it just takes away from the weight and the sincerity of the reality that is being experienced by these people that we don't know about. So, as for my writing, I talk a lot about these sensitive topics as someone who grew in the Philippines, where there is a lot of media censorship that is happening. I don't know if you heard about this, but there are a lot of journalists here in our country that are being killed for telling the truth. And then, just as with religion, being the, I don't know, the biggest Christian country in Asia, it kind of, people here, especially in the church, have a lot to say about these sensitive topics. And these are the things that hinder us from actually talking about those experiences that matter, not just for the individual, but for the collective, especially those in marginalized communities. So I guess it comes from that, and that desire to be someone who can speak for those who can. Yeah.
I see. Right. That's a really fascinating topic, and the things that you mentioned in connection to it as well, because so you believe, and I completely agree that truth is more important than being coy about things and hiding behind realities, because it is important, especially for the people who go through those experiences, for these things to be told, right? So it's not the other way around.
Exactly.
Because you talked about the situation in the Philippines and other such countries, and I think that in Western countries, there aren't really the same problems, although not from society necessarily, but people have become very sensitive, I feel, in recent years. And this, interestingly, also makes them reluctant to talk about these things. So maybe things are not so strict that people are punished for speaking out, but it's regular people, so to speak, so not authorities.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
the regular people that do the censorship. And I
Yeah,
find it
yeah.
really interesting that you are an advocate of this, in spite of having or coming from a place that censors.
Yeah, definitely. Because when we do that, especially for our personal experiences, a lot of people worldwide suffer from suicidal thoughts and a lot of issues with their bodies. If we don't talk about these things, then how would others know that they're not alone in experiencing this and that someone can actually understand them for what is happening to them and their own body and their own mind? It is there is some level of community that can be found in the idea that when these stories are told and somewhere out there in the world can relate to these stories, even if you don't see each other in person or you don't communicate directly to each other, you'd be able to know that um, there are people out there who are going through the same issues as you, and all of a sudden things don't feel as heavy anymore. Yes.
That's true. So, in other words, it is a form of therapy, right? Art and
Yeah,
literature,
very much so.
especially. Right, right. So, what do you think about the this trigger warning culture, so to speak, where people say that, oh no, we should censor everything and but not make it so hard hitting because the people who go through this might be triggered. You think it's actually a form of therapy of catharsis, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, when we shy away from topics like this, especially when things are a little bit religious, political, or social in nature, it kind of takes away from the experience of life in general. We see this kind of censorship, especially in literature that is aimed for young adults recently. And somewhere I've read from study.com, I think, someone said that young adult literature is written to appeal to teenage minds, so it often contains characters who rebel against authority or explore their sexuality, experiment with drugs, deal with negative peer pressure, and these things are experienced by people in general, no matter what culture you're in or no matter what country you're in. When we shy away from talking about this and try to make things more flowery and more easier to digest, then the weight of the problems that are happening and the pressure that these things impart on certain people, they wouldn't really be giving the proper spotlight. It's basically a disservice to those people.
I see. And yes, it's really interesting that you mentioned the young adult novels because it's true that in recent years there has been a lot of talk about how to write these novels as light-hearted as possible, so as to educate young adults and to not give them the opportunity to have any kind of dark thoughts or any kind of inappropriate what adults believe to be inappropriate for that age. Whereas when I was young, for instance, especially where I grew up in Romania,
Mhm.
we didn't really have the notion of young adult fiction. When I was in high school and even younger, I would just read adult fiction and I would slam into all those difficult topics that the classics used to write about. And yes, they did use euphemisms also because of censorship, but the themes were very heavy and they were there, and we had to face them. And really, I think it did wonders. I mean, for me as a writer, it was a great way to learn about life and about human nature. So I completely agree with everything that you've said so far.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's really true. And as someone living in the Philippines, our everyday is really filled with a lot of tragedies, to be honest. It's not an understatement to say that a lot of violence can be seen just by walking out the door here in our country. Not to say that it's not a beautiful country, it is a very beautiful country. But there are a lot of layers that definitely are happening, and a lot of people don't talk about. And if we don't write about that, then how would the rest of the world know that there are these problems, especially when it comes to, for example, um, gay rights is still a really big deal here in the country, and we don't talk about it too much. And there's been countless times that the rights for gay people have been tried to be pushed in the government here, but the people in the Senate kept pushing it back out of everyone's consciousness, and people in the church just accept that, and they move to different things, like, I don't know, like renaming an airport, or or yeah, or adding a new road to an already overcrowded area. And the priorities here is just really messed up. So I believe that it's through writing and through literature that we are able to voice out our concerns. And if we censor these truths, then how will other people know what we're going through? And just like Peter in the story that I've written in A Heaven So True for St. Peter, personally, I also struggled, like him, against my relationships with my mother. Actually, both my parents, and my sexuality, and how to live from paycheck to paycheck as a working student, and the fine line between sex and sexual assault. And these things are my reality, which I attributed parts to Peter's story in order to flesh out that this character is an entire person with his own motivations and his own struggles and his own psychological battles that he has to face. And those kinds of intricacies in creating this unique character can only come from that unique experience that I myself am experiencing. So
that is fascinating, and it's wonderful indeed how you managed to make him so fleshed out. Even though it is a short story, it is a few pages long, but we really get to see Peter's struggles and to really feel what he is going through. Even though our personal experiences as readers may not be the same, but we really feel them. So, what I wanted to ask you next. Writing is very often not about what you write, but about how you write it as well. So how do you approach writing a difficult topic like the ones that we've already mentioned? And how do you balance saying what you want to say with sort of directing your readers' emotions throughout the story? So making them feel the emotions that you want them to feel.
That is a very good question. Personally, how the process looks like for me when I try to write something is I have this idea of how to see the magic in the mundane. For example, in A Heaven So True for St. Peter, the story was actually, this is a very funny story. The idea came about because I was pleasuring myself one time, and then
that's a good way to start a lot of things.
Is this going to be added in the podcast? Because
it's up to you.
Well, I don't know how to hide it. And since we're on the topic of not censoring things, I am not going to shy away from talking
Exactly,
about this.
exactly. Well done.
So,
These things are part of life, so why shy
I
away
know
from talking about it, right?
exactly. So, the point is, I was doing it, and then men have this thing, this biological thing when they finish, when they reach climax. There is this post-coital blues or something, coital
Right, yeah.
dysphoria. Yeah. And I got the idea from there. Like, I asked myself, why am I experiencing that? And then I did a lot of research. I did well, a little bit of research into it, and then I found out that it's not just me, but it's happening to a lot of males, really. And wanted to write about that and balance the idea of how do we say taking something very relatable to the male population and making a really good story out of it. And so I tried my best to see what can a person with postcoital dysphoria be thinking about after reaching the climax. And as for me personally, the first things that I problematize is the fact that I'm a Christian kid who was raised in a Christian household, and yet I am doing these things, pleasuring myself, having sexual relations with other men, which things that are taboo in our religion. And so I tried to talk about that. And while writing that, I switched between being the writer and being the reader, and trying to see how things can be packaged even more with the use of words that I use. Weirdly enough, I know how to use words better in writing than in speech. So there could be times like right now that it would be hard for me to formulate sentences. But when I'm writing, it's really easy for me to switch into, um, I guess, that second nature of creating the perfect flow from word to word in the most concise way as I build up in the way. Uh, no, scratch that. Wait, I trailed off from what I was thinking about. Um, well, I guess the best way to package this is to give an example, maybe. So recently, for my undergraduate thesis, I wrote a memoir about turning into an aswang. It is a mythical monster in Philippine lore. And of course, I use the aswang as a metaphor for my fear and my fight for my autonomy. And this memoir discussed a lot of sensitive topics, such as body dysmorphia, religious trauma, family trauma, rape, and living with HIV. And given that these things, especially the HIV part, is not something that a lot of people can relate to, I asked myself, how can I be able to um, write it in a way that other people can see themselves in? And so I looked into mythology, I looked into magical realism, and it's something that a lot of people have passion for, seeing these things translated into something fantastical and something entertaining. That is usually the way that I try to package these really hard topics. And I think it helps when you have that talent, I guess, or that eye for seeing the magic in the mundane and translating it into words. It really gets people interested, and somehow through the process of defamiliarization, which is a very technical term in writing. Um, if you do that properly and you get the hang of it, you'll be able really to write something that not only expresses what you want to say, but also speaks to other people um, who are not exactly going through the same struggles that you are. I hope that made sense.
Yes, it does. It makes a lot of sense, and you've made some really excellent points there. So, how would you define magical realism? Because you talked about it, and we see it in your writings. And how does it appear in your prose?
Well, magical realism, personally, I think is well, like I said before, it's really finding the magic in the most ordinary things that we see every day. Probably, for example, that urge that we get whenever we see cute creatures. Why do we feel that? That certain level of aggression that we want to squeeze it and choke it, make it pop into like a bubble. And those things, when we push them to past the limit of reality, I think that's where magical realism comes from. And I know that there's a lot of cultural significance in magical realism, especially to Latin American cultures, given its roots in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. But magical realism can really be about defamiliarizing these everyday things and packaging it in a way that we haven't seen before so that we'd get a better perspective of um, these things that we take for granted. And when we do that, we um, have a newfound respect, maybe a sense of wonderment and a sense of appreciation for the things that usually we just won't bat an eye to. So, yeah, I think that's magical realism for me, mostly.
Right, definitely. So, you are interested in mythology and folklore as well, right?
Yes, very much so.
Right, and this is one way in which magical realism appears in your writings, right? Also through this inspiration from mythology and folklore.
Yeah. Actually, one of the local academics, and the reason why I'm really into magical realism and mythology is because this local academic and writer of folklore and sexuality, Mr. Jamie Garcia, wrote in his essay that we should be looking at our local mythologies because there's bound to be a certain level of truth in there, and that truth is what underpins our reality. And what that means is that it's less about the supernatural elements and more about what they represent. So, personally, I like using mythology and magical realism in my writing because there are these really big abstract truths that are hard to swallow when told in a completely realistic way. For example, in the story that I wrote, I haven't so true for Saint Peter. The ghost of Peter's mom is really a metaphor for something else, which is it's the ongoing guilt and resentment that he feels in relation to being a gay person. And his mom represented this ideal, this figure of what being righteous should look like, and the fact that he cannot meet that. And at the same time, he resents the idea that he has to feel this guilt when all he's doing is being true to who he is. And it's definitely a murky gray area that a lot of queer people who grew up in religious households problematize. And another point in the story is when the spikes protruded from Peter's penis. My intention for this is to illustrate uh, how easy it is for traumatized people to also inflict trauma to others. The penal spikes represent a particular level of regression when it comes to a person's humanity. I actually did some research on this thing in male penises. There are bumps around the the head.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, it's an evolutionary residue of penile spikes, like those in lions and other animals, and it's meant to be used as a way of stimulating your sexual partner. And we had that back when civilization was still a concept we haven't been introduced to as humans. So, in the story, when Peter forced himself on Danny in an attempt to reach a quote unquote heaven, he instead fell way, way back into incivility. And this turned him into a monster, just like every person who takes sexual advantage of others in order to reach their own heavens go through. Those people turn into their own personal monsters. And I know that I am explaining all these things when literarily we say that the author is dead, but just because the author is dead doesn't mean that the reality has been put to rest. And that's what I think is what literature does. It has the power to really contextualize these realities, no matter the generation or the culture that you are in. And when that happens, we get a clearer picture of where we are now in terms of progress as humans. And we get to answer the question, how far has humanity gone since the beginning of civilization? And that's what A Heaven So True for St. Peter is about, really. We all have our own truths, our own struggles, but the question is, where do we go from there? And in the story, Peter chose heaven instead of his humanity. But so, in relation to the readers, how about us? What do we choose from here? And our answer to these questions can really help us decide whether to continue on the path we're currently taking or veer towards a different path to improvement. So that's kind of it. That makes sense.
Excellent. Those were really brilliant points that you made. And wow, when you mentioned the part in the story with the spikes, I just remembered when I was first reading it, and I was so excited when I got to the climax of the story. I was like, oh my God, that is amazing. I just love the part.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you.
So, and also thank you for sharing the story with us and all of your thoughts about it, because it's really fascinating to see what you were thinking when you were writing it. And you are right. The magical realism and the mythology, the folklore, they are all ways into the human subconscious.
Yeah.
This is exactly what all those superstitions are, right? That we still hold today, manifestations of our fears. So I think that it was really in a brilliant fashion that you put all that into your story, into a story that was up until that point very realistic. And then we sort of see him turning into, well, I'm not going to say more because we have already said a lot. So I'm not going to, we can talk about it afterwards and I can then detail on that. But right, so this is magical realism, exactly what you described. Right. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of fiction do you like reading generally? Is it something that is a lot like what you write, or is it something completely different? So magical realism, folklore, or not only?
When it comes to reading fiction, I'm actually a lot into young adult fiction because I think there are a lot of topics in young adult fiction that are very important to talk about that adult fiction try to stay away from just because they think it's they're already above those topics. So I try my best to consume every and all type of literature that I can, but mostly young adult fiction, since it varies really from generation to generation. What may be considered young adult for millennials may be different for the current generation. And it's really fun to see how those nuances and those ideas of being a young adult changes as time progresses. And apart from that, I'm also very, very into horror. And particularly psychological horror. I read a lot of Stephen King, who's also very good in in magical realism in his works, and he is actually one of my inspirations whenever I write um, really dark topics, such as what I wrote for the magazine. And so, whenever I read these things, and especially horror and young adult fiction, it kind of gives me a sense of catharsis, and also a sense of I don't know, presentness, I guess. When it comes to, okay, so is my knowledge of the present world still up to date? Because as much as I would like to learn more about the science of things, it just bores me out completely too. It's 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 through these things, through horror, through young adult fiction, that I get to be in tune to what the world looks like at present, how people are responding, particularly to gay culture, let's say. Um, Fiction about the LGBT community is very different from between, I mean, the 90s and now. It's different for uh, my local literature, which is the Philippines, and the young adult literature in the Western countries. So it's really interesting to see how progressive things have become. And I enjoy learning more about how people are and what makes humanity tick.
Right, right. Yeah, that's true. And one last question. Are there any literary projects that you're working on at the moment?
At the moment, actually, yes, I have multiple projects that I'm working on. Recently, I just finished the manuscript for the memoir I was talking about earlier, which is entitled "Leave Me Beyond Function." It's a collection of personal essays about my struggles with HIV and how I deal with it, along with my problems with religion and sexuality, just as Peter has. And then what is different about this is that I try to experiment with the forms in each essay, and try to tell what is happening to me in reality, with still a touch of mythological elements to it. So, like I discussed earlier, it's me writing about how I'm transforming into this Philippine monster called the Aswang, and how that Aswang is a representation of my fears and also my liberation. And I've actually submitted it to a few international literary journals, such as the Unconventional Courier, and two of them already got accepted. The others are still under review. And apart from that, I'm also writing another collection of personal essays entitled "The Year of uh, Running Away," which is about well, last year. It's just last year when I took things into my own hands and started living by myself independently, and how each month has presented a new hurdle for me in terms of healing and getting to know myself, when in the first 25 years of my life, I've been living under a false personality that someone else created for me. So I'm really excited to have that finished as well, and to show the readers of Heaven So True for St. Peter what I've been doing since the publication of this short story.
This is really exciting, and I'm really glad that you are being so productive. And I'm really excited to read more of your stories, because I feel that we've just had a little taste of what you can write in that one story that we have. So we really need more of that. Wow, so this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Gershom,
Thank
for
you to
sharing
Rebecca.
all your plans and your thoughts and your ideas. This was really fantastic.
Yeah, I hope the listeners of this podcast would have a great time listening to me because personally I did not enjoy myself. But I hope everyone else had fun listening to me ramble on, and I really had a lot of fun talking to you today.
I'm sure everybody does love listening to you. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for listening.